You've heard this advice 100 times, probably from a well-meaning relative at some point. Stop buying lattes, and you'll magically have money for retirement. Cut the $7 coffee, and somehow you'll turn into a millionaire. It's one of the most repeated pieces of money advice out there, and today I want to actually check if it holds up. Because if it's true, this might be the easiest financial fix you'll ever hear. And if it's not true, you deserve to know that too before you spend another year feeling guilty over a $5 drink. Because on the surface, the math does sound kind of convincing. Say you buy one coffee a day, about $7, 5 days a week. That's roughly $1,800 a year just on coffee. Invest that instead at a normal market return for 30 years, and it can genuinely grow into a huge number, sometimes cited as over $200,000. So the logic seems airtight, right? Small daily habit, big long-term cost. Cut it and get rich. This idea even has a name in personal finance circles, often called the Latte factor. It came from a popular personal finance book, and the idea spread everywhere because it's such a clean, simple story. And the first get why it caught on, because it feels empowering. It makes you feel like you're in control of your future with one simple swap. But here's the problem. This idea quietly shifts the blame for being broke onto a $5 coffee, while ignoring the stuff that's actually breaking most people's budgets. Let's look at where money really goes for the average person. Housing is usually the single biggest expense by far, often close to a third of someone's income. After that, it's transportation, then debt payments, especially high-interest debt like credit cards. Combined, those three categories dwarf coffee spending, and it's not even close. If your rent goes up by $200 a month, that's $2,400 a year. Compare that to what people usually imagine when they picture wasteful spending. A $200 rent increase barely registers as a decision at all. It just happens to you. It costs more than an entire year of a daily coffee habit without a single latte in sight. That erases an entire year of lat savings in one single rent increase, and you didn't even buy a single coffee to cause it. So why does the coffee get all the blame, and not the rent? This is actually a documented pattern in how people think about money, called mental accounting. It's a concept from behavioral economist Richard Taylor, who studied how people mentally sort spending into separate little buckets, instead of looking at the full picture. Fun spending, like coffee or takeout, gets filed into a bucket labeled optional, and it gets scrutinized hard. Fixed spending, like rent or a car payment, gets filed into a bucket labeled necessary, and it barely gets questioned at all. Even when the necessary bucket is actually where most of the leaks are happening. Think about how differently those two buckets get treated in your own head. If you buy an extra coffee, you notice it, maybe even feel a little flash of guilt right there at the register. If your car insurance renews at a slightly higher rate, you probably don't even open the email carefully. One gets scrutinized every single day, the other gets rubber-stamped once a year without much thought. It's easier to feel guilty about a lat than it is to sit down and actually renegotiate your rent or shop around for car insurance. The latte is visible, it happens every day, and it's an easy target for guilt. Rent increase happened once, quietly, in an email from your landlord, and then it just becomes the new normal. Nobody feels a daily pang of guilt over a fixed subscription or a slightly too expensive apartment. But that quiet, invisible cost is usually doing far more damage than the coffee ever could. This shows up in so many areas beyond just coffee too. People agonize over a $15 delivery fee while letting a streaming subscription they forgot about quietly charge them every single month. A small, visible charge gets noticed and judged. The bigger, recurring charge just blends into the background of your bank statement. Let me walk through a fairly typical example. Say someone decides to fully commit to cutting coffee, no exceptions, for an entire year. They save around $1,800, which is genuinely a solid amount of money, no argument there. That same year, their apartment lease renews, and rent goes up by $150 a month. That's $1,800 a year in rent alone, completely wiping out the coffee savings. Meanwhile, they still have a credit card carrying a balance at over 20% interest. That interest alone could easily be costing more than the coffee ever did. So after a full year of daily coffee sacrifice and real willpower spent every single morning, their financial position hasn't actually moved. On paper, they did everything the advice told them to do. They skipped the coffee, felt disciplined, and still ended the year in roughly the same spot financially. That's a genuinely demoralizing result after 12 months of real effort. Not because they failed, because they were optimizing the wrong line item the entire time. This is what makes Latte guilt so frustrating. It gives you the feeling of financial discipline without addressing the thing that's actually keeping you stuck. You feel like you're doing something responsible every time you skip a coffee. Meanwhile, the real leverage points, the ones that would move the needle, go completely unexamined. So what actually moves the needle? Generally, it's the big three: housing, transportation, and debt. On housing, even a modest negotiation on rent renewal or refinancing a mortgage when rates allow can outweigh years of small daily cuts. On transportation, comparing insurance rates once a year or reconsidering an expensive car payment often saves more in one afternoon than a month of no coffee. Car payments in particular quietly balloon for a lot of people. An extra $100 a month on a car that's nicer than it needs to be adds up to $1,200 a year, again, without a single coffee involved. On debt, paying down high-interest balances first saves you more in avoided interest than almost any lifestyle change you could make. None of these are as emotionally satisfying as skipping a coffee. There's no daily moment of visible willpower, no immediate feeling of virtue. Negotiating your rent is a single, slightly awkward phone call, not a daily ritual you can feel proud of each morning. But it's where the actual money is. This doesn't mean small spending never matters at all. If you're buying 5 coffees a day out of pure boredom, sure, that adds up too, and it's worth noticing. The point is proportion. Obsessing over a $7 coffee while ignoring a $300 car payment on a car you didn't need is optimizing the wrong number. It's a version of looking for your keys under the streetlight because that's where the light is, instead of where you actually drop them. It's rearranging deck chairs while the actual issue sits untouched right next to you. And there's a reason this advice spreads so easily anyway. It's simple, it feels actionable, and it doesn't require an uncomfortable conversation with a landlord, a bank, or a credit card company. Telling someone to skip coffee is easy advice to give and easy advice to follow for a few days. Telling someone to renegotiate their rent, refinance a loan, or seriously confront their debt takes more effort, and it can feel intimidating. There's also a comfort in blaming small daily choices. It keeps the problem feeling personal and controllable instead of systemic and uncomfortable. Because if the real issue is that your area got more expensive to live in, that's a much scarier thing to sit with than a coffee habit. So the easy advice spreads, while the effective advice quietly gets ignored. If you actually want to fix your finances, here's a more useful way to spend your energy. Once a year, actually look at your 3 biggest expenses, not your smallest ones. Ask if your housing cost still makes sense for where you are right now. Ask if your transportation cost could be lower through insurance shopping or a different vehicle decision. Ask if you're carrying high-interest debt that's quietly costing you more than any daily habit ever could. None of these conversations are as comfortable as skipping a coffee. But comfort was never actually the goal here. Results were. Those 3 questions will do more for your finances in one afternoon than a year of guilt over coffee. And if you still want your coffee, genuinely have the coffee. Enjoy it without the guilt, because it was never really the problem in the first place. You don't need to earn your coffee through suffering somewhere else in your budget. The guilt just felt easier to carry than the bigger conversations were. So the next time someone tells you to cut your coffee to get rich, you can smile and know the real math tells a different story. If this shifted how you think about your own budget, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel digs into every week. Money and career psychology without the guilt trips. Subscribe if you want more of this. And tell me in the comments, what's your actual big 3: housing, transportation, or debt? See you in the next one.